It is no longer news that there are numerous opportunities in agriculture across the different subsectors. There is no doubt a growing interest, especially among young people who are keen into the sector's opportunities. A major challenge, of course, is usually funding for their business or ideas. With a good plan and excellent strategy, this challenge can be overcome. SEYE BASIR, an investment director with the Investment Fund for Developing Countries, IFU, an international organization that has over the years worked with and provided funding for a number of agro-processing companies, is passionate about seeing the sector grow with more people creating businesses and adding value. In this interview, he shares investment opportunities available in the sector and interesting insights on how entrepreneurs can position themselves for funding, grow their business, and actualize their dreams.
One of our main areas of focus is agribusiness. That's part of the reason is because Denmark traditionally became a developed country riding off the back of its agric sector. And so there's a lot of competencies that a lot of Danish companies and traditional Danish partners to IFU are able to bring to investments that we invest in, not just in Nigeria, but all over the world. And from Nigeria here, I'm covering, of course, Nigeria, but also the rest of many other countries in West Africa. The impact has been quite strong. One big investment that IFU made several years ago is a very well-known story called fan milk. IFU originally invested in fan milk, I think in the 70s, and supported the company through several financing rounds, including when it wasn't always clear that there was a path to exit that investment. And from a developmental point of view, it's been very significant in terms of number of jobs created. A lot of the men pushing those carts, the family men supporting families, and of course the nutrition, which is always something that is very important in agribusiness and food investments. So, and that goes to the other point, which is, IFU just traditionally tracks developmental impacts. We're looking for a double bottom line, not just to invest and make money, but also to create a developmental impact. The way we put it, IFU invest in everything from the farm to the fork. So that includes everything from primary production, whether it's animal husbandry, anything like that, or crop production, and everything in the value chain, including logistics, including inputs, extension services, all trading, all of those things can be IFU investments. If you look at Nigeria, for an organization like IFU that has been in Nigeria for about 50 years, one of the early investments done was in the 60s, and I'll take a very big investment that we made. There's a company called Just Breweries, the Rock Beer, which was a well-known brand back in the day. There was an original investment in the brewery, but not just in the brewery, but also into significant crop production of cereals, and investment in the mill to provide inputs into the brewery. So in that era, when those investments were made, Nigeria was quite different then. You couldn't come in and just build a brewery. You had to take care of the inputs as well. You had to, and there weren't many uses of what you were producing at that time. So you had to produce at a very, very high scale and take on a very large number of activities to be able to achieve your goal, to be able to produce beer. And that's changed, so that's evolved, right? So in many ways now, for the brewery sector, we've seen it's really, really opened up, like lots of investments there, and many of the Nigerian breweries now are sourcing their cereals, whether it's barley, whether it's sorghum, they're sourcing locally. And so if you were a miller, who just chose to focus on milling and processing grains, then you have a wide market that you can serve, and you don't have to be dependent on one single company that if it folded up, then you would go under. Nigeria is very difficult for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons is infrastructure. Just getting your produce to market, getting your produce to people who need it and want it. It's not trivial. There are many other things, many other problems. One other problem is just price discovery. What we've often seen in Nigeria, for example, with grains, is that the price goes in a 3-year cycle. What happens is, for example, the first year, people plant corn. They don't get much money. The year after, they don't plant. And because they don't plant, then there's a huge supply gap. The price goes up, then suddenly everybody rushes into it again. Next thing you know, the price goes up. So, the unpredictability is significant as well. Very often you don't find significant players to partner with, right? So if, for example, you were planning to do poultry in the biggest poultry companies in the world, outside of Nigeria, very often do not integrate the entire poultry value chain. In Nigeria, to produce competitively, you might have to do everything from the hatchery, just the eggs, so that you can lay the eggs, you can hatch them, you can then grow them into when they are ready to be killed and slaughtered, and then from slaughter, you then go into processing, and distribution. Very often in Nigeria, you have to do that entire value chain by yourself. That takes, in some ways, focus because one of the interesting things about agribusiness and agriculture especially is that if you have 1.5, the way agriculture works is if you have 1.5, next year you want to get it to 1.55. The year after you want to get it to 1.75. The year after you want to just keep on improving whatever that metric is that is important to you. So in the poultry example I gave, one very key thing is what they call the feed conversion ratio. You buy feed, you feed the animals, and you convert it into protein, so to fatten them up. And that ratio is one of the key things that the poultry industry tracks. And so being able to focus on just improving that sometimes is a very valuable thing if you can find other partners who can, for example, you have a good supply of day-old chicks, you have a good supply of feed, you have a good supply of water, slaughter, everything. You just need to partner and just focus on a core area that you excel in. So not having that is quite difficult in Nigeria. It can be very, very, very difficult. Finance is always a big one. Government policy is always a big one. If you're producing subscale and you go to somebody who is let's say from a structured financing background, would look at some of those things and see only risk and not opportunity. The level of energy in Agric now is very good. One interesting thing about Nigeria is that the agricultural potential of the country is enormous, right? There's so many things. Nigeria can be a leading producer of cotton, for example, and very few people cultivate it outside of a certain area. There are areas of Nigeria where cocoa could do well, where it hasn't even been introduced to. I could go on and on. Point is, one of the things young people need to do sometimes is to just go into uncharted territory sometimes and innovate or find niches and find ways to play in areas that are let's say maybe less beaten, less explored than others are. That's one. But I think two, the second one is just focus and long-term approach. Agribusiness, the old joke about agribusiness is that You know how you make a small fortune in farming? You start with a big fortune. So you start with a big fortune, then you make a small fortune. But really, it's a long-term thing. It takes like 5 years before you actually really master your soil, you really master your climate, you master your crops, whatever it is you're doing. So that's one of the things. If you decide to go into it, be committed, don't be short-termist. I think that's one. The second one is just to be able to just learn and absorb a lot of information and look widely, just look to other places for examples, for insight, for knowledge, for new methods, for assistance, for markets, and so just keep exploring and looking. That's another thing. For young people, I think nowadays there's the whole cooperative thing. And with cooperatives in Nigeria has gone up and down, up and down. Cooperatives originally started maybe in the 20s, in the 1920s or 1910s. A lot of farmers came together in cooperatives, and that actually worked for a while. But that hasn't evolved. And so that helps with young people, where you can share inputs, you can share, like infrastructure or certain costs, and that reduces. And we're starting to see that with, innovations like farm crowding. We're starting to see that with innovations like Babangona, all of which more or less are doing the same thing, which is sharing certain resources in a way that makes farming more efficient, more productive, and therefore more profitable. It's very important for people to specialize and go into different parts of the value chain, right? So there are people who are providing seedlings, who just focus on producing seeds, and then there are people who who focus on how to apply pesticides and how to deal with, pesticide and crop protection. On the veterinary side, the same thing. Just a number of players who go in there. When people think about agriculture, everybody thinks only about planting. There are many, endless number of things that you can do in the agricultural space that creates value and can be business. But that's another thing. One big problem we have here is just that people drifted from the rural areas to the urban areas. And part of the problem is that a lot of the rural areas just don't have the infrastructure. So we always come back to this. And sometimes infrastructure is dealt with as if you need to have a 10-lane highway in rural areas before. Sometimes all you just need is a dirt road that is well graded, and is maintained at that graded level. You don't need to travel at 200 kilometers per hour, 100 kilometers per hour. You just need to be able to travel at 80 kilometers per hour and not have disruptions along the way. One big problem now is security. Security. We know that security is challenging in Nigeria. Population growth has been huge, and we've had, the farmers' headsmen crisis going on all over the country. We've had sometimes, unfortunately, issues of kidnapping. But basically what's going on is that in certain areas, rural security, isn't there yet. And so the government needs to come up with ways to deal with those issues on a long-term basis.